30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of All About You. And All About You is actually one of two different talk shows that I have the luxury of broadcasting here every single week at AccessTV.org studios. All About You is a show that's designed to give you, the viewers, and the guests a chance to hear his or her life story. This morning on All About You, I have a legendary roots reggae lead singer from a very popular group, not just in England, but pretty much throughout certain parts of the world. And this guest has come down to give his particular life story. The guest this morning on All About You is no other than the co-founder, lead singer, majority songwriter of the Grammy Award winning Still Poets, no other than David Hinds. Good morning, David. How are you doing?
How are you, Jonathan? How you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's a pleasure to meet you and have you on All About You.
All right, I hear
Okay.
you.
Yes. David, I believe you were born and raised in Birmingham, England. Could you kind of let people know a little bit about your life growing up as a child, first of all, in Birmingham, England?
Well, growing up in Birmingham, England, I mean, it all began with my parents migrating from Jamaica and was one among the populace that came to work in the UK based on all the setbacks because of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So they came over as migrants, and the general job that was going on there at the time was, laboring on buses, females work in hospitals, and the men generally work in factories. So I became the first generation of blacks that were born in Britain because of the migration of my parents from the Caribbean right after World War II.
Mm-hmm. Now, in Birmingham, like you mentioned, it's a heavily industrialized sector of England. And as you mentioned, a lot of Jamaicans and other Caribbean nationalities have migrated to that part of England for, I guess, decades, according to what people say.
Correct.
And do you kind of feel like you're somewhat, even though you're in England with so much of a Caribbean, Jamaican population, do you kind of get a sense that you can kind of relate to Jamaica, even though you're in Birmingham?
Most definitely. The era we grew out of, we grew with parents that were not familiar with the British culture.
Mm.
So being the first generation of blacks born in Britain, we affiliated a lot more with the Jamaican part of our heritage than the British at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Because our parents took a long time to assimilate within the environment. There was a language barrier, there was a food barrier,
Mm-hmm.
and there was also a cultural activity barrier. Music was different,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole lifestyle was a different thing. So we grew up exposed to that for the first 5 years of our lives. Then all of a sudden, everything changed, and we had to start going to school.
Mm-hmm.
So we started to interact with the European, the English kids. We started to realize there was a difference in culture. So yeah, it took a hell of a transition while I was a child and adapting, bobbing and weaving to how everything was at the time. I'm at home speaking with Jamaican patois, eating Jamaican food. Then I'm at school speaking English. and eating English type of foods like rhubarb and all that kind of stuff, shepherd's pie and all these kind of British type dishes was quite alien to my parents. If I said shepherd's pie to my mother and father, go, what? What's that? So it was that kind of thing going on, which was a standard British dish in England.
So did you feel comfortable, I guess they call it cold talking, patois at home, then going to school, formal British? Was there any kids ranking on you? I mean, what was the whole cultural atmosphere beyond just the norm for you as a kid growing up, trying to assimilate with two different cultures?
Well, we did it. It came natural to us, if you see what I'm saying. After a while, we just realized that's how it was. But if you'd put, the Jamaicans now, for example, that came over, that were my age group, that came over after, but because they were born in Jamaica and came, it was very difficult for them to assimilate because they realized the language much different. And the methods of teaching was a lot different as well. So most Jamaican kids that were my age that came over afterwards, they had a hard time being slotted into what they need to be slotted into as far as the academical level at school. And oftentimes they were put in the lower streams or the lower grade type forms because of the English or the lack of speaking English to the perfection that was needed at that time. So it was that kind of thing. But being born there, we naturally adjusted to how it was. We just say, hang on, this is how it is.
Right.
But for someone who came over fresh off the boat or off the plane, it was a whole different ball game for quite some time, to the point where many of them hated the idea of being in England, if you see what I'm saying, and wished to return back, but unfortunately wasn't able to do so because their parents says, well, we've got you now, kind of thing.
Right. Now, overall, do you feel somewhat blessed that you was born and raised in Birmingham, England, that you probably was exposed and learned some things that you wouldn't have learned had you been born in Jamaica?
That's a very good question. I feel, when I look at it and reflect on my life, I'm happy within myself that I was actually being able to be born in England as opposed to Jamaica at the time. Because it was easy for me. My parents carried so much of the culture, and so did all their peers at that time, their contemporaries, carried so much of the culture that we didn't miss Jamaica very much. That's what I'm saying. It was right there, the things that the folklores they spoke about, the stories they talked about, the fables they spoke about, everything was right there. And it was only for me to see Jamaica physically. So that saying that now, I know if Steel Pulse started to formulate itself as a band in Jamaica, I don't think it would have happened. So I give thanks for the fact that we were able to be raised in England and had a chance to view things from a standpoint that nobody else did at that time, and got through, and also our message transcended to the rest of the world. Having us try to start in Jamaica with what we had to say as a band, I don't think we would have had a look in.
Now, for Steel Pulse, you were the co-founder, but before Steel Pulse, let's say, was established, reggae or roots reggae kind of started off technically in Jamaica, and most people throughout the world kind of give Bob Marley the credit as being I guess the godfather or the founder of reggae. Was Bob Marley kind of the first person that you started listening to, or were there other reggae acts that you were exposed to beyond him?
Well, first of all, let's go through the history. Now, the Jamaicans migrated, the Caribbean people migrated, but most in particular Jamaicans were the lion's share of the Caribbean populace at that time. And when they came over to England, they came over with mento, which is one of the very earliest forms of Jamaican music. And there was calypso, then there was blue beat, then there was ska, then there was rock steady, and then there was reggae as we know it. And there were lots of artists that were featured during those eras at the time, long before Bob Marley came into the picture. Because you had Derek Morgan, for example, and Prince Buster, who were all part of the scat and blue beat revival kind
Right.
of thing going on. So by the time Marley came to the picture and made any indentation in our lives, I reckon it was about 1970 or 71 when he came with songs like Duppy Conqueror and Mr. Brown and Trenchtown Rock. These were all the songs that were floating around within, you know, the sound systems that we attended, you know, in the blues, which was like a speakeasy kind of thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when Bob Marley's music first came into play as far as we were concerned. But there were a lot of acts before him. Even in the reggae world, there were acts like Alton Ellis, Owen Gray, Pat Kelly, Ken Booth, just to name a few, Delroy Wilson, and all these acts had more of a look-in as far as popularity than Bob Marley at the time.
Mm.
So what made Bob Marley prominent now was the Rude Boy era that came with him, which was like it was almost like a Kingstonian form of being a gangster sort of thing. So a lot of other acts started to cotton on to, you know, the Rude Boy kind of vibes. You know, you had Desmond Decker, who was part of that experience as well, and Toots and the Maytals. So Marley now, by the time he got signed to Island, it was a completely different experience in the regards to the way his music was not only challenged, but the way his music was coming over to the Jamaican populace within England itself. And during that period of time, the Rastafari movement was also evolving within the UK as well. And acts like Burning Spear made a contribution. So when we're talking about how the music came to England, we can't leave those other acts that were there long before Marley. And, you know, although there were 2 or 3, 4 years difference in age as far as artists and what they did, you know, all these simple 2-3 years age differences made a big difference, if you see what I'm saying, as far as what a man was doing at that time musically.
Well, like I told you, even off of the air, I remember someone that went to England. He was in the military. This was, I believe, in 1988. And he came back to the U.S., and him and this Jamaican man, they was talking about what life in England consists of. And I remember him kept mentioning Steel Pulse. That was the first time I ever heard of Steel Pulse, but he kept mentioning Steel Pulse, you know, their type of music, their type of sound. And I can't remember him mentioning any other particular artist group. It looks like to me Steel Pulse kind of was the main nationally figured reggae group, if I'm correct, let's say in England. I mean, there had to be other groups, but for some reason, your group, Steel Pulse, seemed to stand out probably more than any other group, particularly in England. Was there other groups, though, that you felt that you were competing with that was just as good as you, or just...
Oh, gosh.
Okay.
There was a lot of other groups, and there were a lot of other bands that were more, you know, physically and more, you know, as far as music ability, were a lot more talented than Steel Pulse. You know, you had Matumbi, you know, there was Reggae Regulars, there was Black Slate, Misty and Roots, Capital Letters, the Cimarrons, the Undivided. There was a load of them. But what made Steel Pulse prominent, and for, you know, the individual that you mentioned to recognize us, was the direction we took within the industry itself. Reggae in its earliest form, us living in England and trying to our best to emulate that particular sound, but there's a lot to trying to copy the Jamaican sound than what, you know, what met the eye at the time. And it was all about not only the performance, but the way the studio sounded, the way the instruments were EQ'd within the studio itself. And being in British recording studios, they're totally unfamiliar with how a bass would sound on a reggae record, what kind of EQ to put on the hi-hat, what kind of EQ to put on the drums. And every time you went into a British studio to try and record a reggae track, and you try to EQ the bass to have a bit more bottom end to it, they were all holding their ears because they're saying, "Well, you're gonna, as if you're gonna destroy their equipment," because they weren't used to the frequencies that reggae had to offer. So that was a challenge, and as a result, the people, the Jamaican populace within Britain itself, never embraced the reggae music that was coming out of Britain. So bands like ourselves, your Aswads and your Black Slates, took a long time to get recognized because, as far as they were concerned, because of the sound and because of the cultural aspect as well attached to the sound, that there was no actual reggae coming from out of Britain, but more so the original place, which was Jamaica. So it took quite a while for bands like ourselves to get accepted. So we had management now that came with an idea that they thought for us to be recognized nationally, for us to actually mingle or interact with the style of music that was happening at that time within Britain, which was the punk rock era. The punk rock era, for those who are not familiar with the punk rock era, was an era where, you had a group, of young white youths that were totally against, the politics of the system. And they were totally for anything that the system was against. And they were totally for, they were totally for, like, for example, the system didn't play reggae music on a regular basis on their national radios. So the punk rock said, all right, you don't play reggae, we're going to have reggae acts supporting us. So we went out and we started doing tours with bands like the Adverts, Generation X, Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols. Who else was there? King Eddie, Endure and the Blockheads, and the Stranglers. So these punk rock acts were huge acts that were happening within Britain at the time that was going very much left-wing orientated politically. They weren't into the racism that used to be there within the 60s and the early part of the 70s within Britain itself. They were all about being anti-system, anti-establishment, that kind of thing. And reggae music was part of being, anti-established, if you see what I'm saying. So they embraced us and we got recognized through that route. And I think your friend or your associate recognized the band because of the efforts and the journey we took in that direction to have an international and national name. And before you know it, Steel Pulse had a top 20 album within the charts by 1978 with Hands Up Revolution. And within 6 months of us signing a record label, we were on tour with Bob Marley and the Wailers. So I think that's the reason why your friend would recognize Steel Pulse more than everybody else, because of the direction we actually took. And, it was a home run.
Right. And a matter of fact, if you look at the fact that Steel Pulse is the only non-Jamaican born reggae group that has ever won a Grammy, that's like a grand slam if you really break that down. and I believe that was your 1986 album that you won the Grammy Award?
That's right. It was an album called Babylon the Bandit, which, when I look back, in the whole history and scheme of things, I didn't really consider it as our best works. But I think it was like a payback for the album that came before that, which was the Earth Crisis album that actually got nominated the year before, when reggae came on what came more like an entity now within the Grammy nominations. That's up until 1985. There were no reggae categories, so to speak, for the Grammys. So when 85 came in and started to recognize reggae as a category, our album Earth Crisis was nominated. And I remember being in Los Angeles at the time when they were calling out the nominations, and there was a radio station that escapes me. Their name escapes me. I know it was K something, because in California it all starts with a K kind of thing. And the people calling in and they're saying, sure, Steel Pulse was going to win this. Steel Pulse is going to get it. Steel Pulse is going to get it. So I go down to the Grammy Awards. It was February of 1985. And there was also Ducky Simpson from Blackie Uhuru, who was another contender. And I can't remember the others, but I do remember Blackie Uhuru being, another nominee. And when they called the name out, and the winner is Blackie Uhuru, it was a shock to everyone's system, including mine, because of the acclaim that the Earth Crisis album was getting at that time. So I after a while, I put it down to, record label politics. I do remember at that time, Blackie, who when they collected that award, was a split band. They never really they dismembered at that time for whatever internal reasons that they had, and I started to believe that maybe them winning the Grammy would have sort of stimulated them or sort of stirred their thoughts to formulate themselves again and go out there as an act, but it never worked.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. I thought Earth Crisis was a much stronger album, and so did the population. We still see royalties from it now.
Right.
So there you go. Babylon the Bandit, yes. I mean, we got to give credit to where credit is due, but I always thought the album before was the one that deserved that Grammy, and I think the record industry said, well, you know what? I think we should pay them back.
Right.
I think that's how we got that one.
Yeah, a great choice. One thing about, and by you being the majority songwriter and you're the lead singer, you have a big control. I don't know if you're the producer, but certainly by you being the songwriter and the lead singer for the majority of the songs, if not all of the songs, you have a tremendous voice towards what direction you would like the sound and style of Still Pulse to emulate. And one thing about your group, Still Pulse, you seem to always stay consistent with some type of social or political message. You got songs, Ku Klux Klan, many other political songs that you always stay true to your message. The difference, I think, and maybe it's a comparison in the U.S. at the same time, where Third World was getting, I would say, to be fair enough, they were getting a little bit more airplay, let's say, on black entertainment television. They were kind of trying to, I guess, break into somewhat of an R&B sound to mix with reggae. And people throughout the country and throughout the world will look at Still Pulse and Third World to, not so much as y'all rivaling each other, but it's like, if you're going to pick two of the biggest international reggae groups, most people would say it's either Still Pulse or it's either Third World. Did you look at it somewhat of a comparison, or you're competing against Third World, or that they were doing things a little bit different than you? I mean, what was your whole take on just Third World, as you are, making songs and albums?
Well, in all honesty, I never looked at it like that initially, but I can see why people would do the comparisons, if you see what I'm saying. Where I think we are similar as an act is that, number one, we were quite young. I mean, you had Cat Core, lead guitarist, where, he was exactly our age as well, born in the same year and everything else. And, we were equally mesmerized how talented this individual was. And most important of all is how they were trying to bring something new to the table other than the reggae that was conventionally known. If you see what I'm saying. So we as a band also felt that way, that we thought there was a more of a need to have something else happening with the music than what was already out there for the band and for the act and for the style of music and the music as a genre to get more popularity throughout the world. And I think Third World decided to go the R&B route, where they sort of interloped and cross-sectioned the reggae with the way the R&B. So they sort of raised the tempo, because if you compare the tempos of the reggae that was happening at that time versus what was R&B going on at that time, the tempos are quite different. So Third World started to formulate songs where the tempos are more upbeat for the attraction of American audiences, if you see what I'm saying. And we, in a sense, wanted to go more towards changing the chord structures that was people already were accustomed to and listening to in reggae. For example, I'm not familiar with music, but if someone was using like a regular A minor chord, we would want to, instead of using an A minor chord, a particular chord change, we probably want to use a suspended chord or A minor 11th, just to give the ears a different sound to what they're accustomed to listening to when they're listening to regular reggae music. So these are the things that made Steel Pulse stand apart from the reggae that was going on within the industry at that time, coming from out of Jamaica, as well as the lyrical content, of course. I mean, our subject matters were far different than what was the Jamaicans were actually portraying and displaying and depicting at that time. So these are the things, and Third World is trying to do the same thing, where they're trying to choose different subjects, try Ja Love, and they did cover versions, as you know. Now That We Find Love,
Right.
it was a cover version. When I remember hearing that for the first time, and I think they did another song as well, which I was surprised. There was a track called "Head to the Sky." Keep Your Head to the Sky, which is right. I thought it was a Third World song until I started to hear Earth, Wind and Fire performing that song, and I said, "Wait a minute, this is Third World." And I said, "No, Earth, Wind and Fire did this."
Right.
And I'm listening to it for the first time, and I'm saying, you know what? I prefer Third World's version. So, as far as us as a band trying to bring something else to the table, I think that's where we sort of we engage, where we have the similarities.
Right. And again, you made a conscious, or let's say, I guess consciousness, or just a professional decision to not want to really cross over, let's say, into R&B, bring a little hip hop, because you see over the decades, a lot of reggae artists now, even the dancehall artists, they try to collaborate with the rap or the hip hop and some R&B, but you've kind of really made a decision for whatever particular reason just to stay to the roots reggae.
Well, you know something? It's something I've often said in interviews. When Marley died, which is in 1981, the reggae music died with him. And I say that because on his passing, he was trying to get a certain type of audience within the United States. He tried to get on certain type of radio stations at the time, and reggae was still not getting the looking it deserved, even up till when he died. So all the reggae acts at that time, and because the industry was not catering for reggae anymore, we saw the need collectively. We never sat down around a round table and says, "Guess what, guys? This is what we need to do to keep the music alive because Bob's gone now." We sort of gathered around ourselves individually, not as a whole, this group, that group, having a conference and discussing it. But we said to ourselves, it looked like we're going to have to try and find a way for us to let the Americans accept our music even more. So many bands started to either do cover versions or sort of, in a way, water down their music to let it have that sound that the Americans were accustomed to, for them to get that airplay and go out there touring on a hit record. Many bands, and I'd say Steel Pulse included. And it was we were forced to go in a particular direction by the time we did the Victims album. We were signed to MCA at that time, and MCA was all about R&B. They wanted bands like the Family Stand, which had a hit record out called Ghetto Heaven. And at the time, we also were working with a guy called... he was the producer of Madonna's records as well. Stephen Bray, I think his name was.
Right.
Working out of LA. And I remember us going into the studio and recording Soul of My Soul and Can't Get You Out of My System, which was some tracks that we played on the Victims album. All because the record labels thought we needed to get that R&B sound to stay alive as an act. And we also at that time recorded the track called Taxi Driver. And, the record label wasn't interested in that because it was a reggae track. And they spent thousands, or we spent thousands of dollars trying to record these two songs. Because these guys are top line producers, Bray and Family Stand, Peter Lord and Jeff Smith were the producers of Family Stand when they did the Ghetto Heaven. So all of a sudden we're working with these big producers that wanted big money, and none of those tracks happened. And the track that took to the American audience was Taxi Driver. And the reason being, there was a big racial issue happening in New York at the time and in certain parts across the United States, where taxi cabs are not, stopping for, people of color. Mm-hmm. And we sort of did a song based on that experience, going in and out in New York and having to have, the bellman from a hotel flag a cab for us to go to any designated destinations. And we wrote that song, and before you know it, we had Al Sharpton involved, we had Jay Leno involved, Robert Townsend, who was a well-known comedian at the time, involved. Who else? There's Tony Johnson, who was the guy that organized the Sunsplash tours within Jamaica itself. Who else? One or two news media entities throughout New York that gravitated toward it. Before you know it, we're on the news fighting a lawsuit against the Taxi and Limousine Commission. Mm-hmm. And we did a video for it, and the rest is history. Steel Pulse became center page on many of the newspapers across the United States for that reason. Mm-hmm. So we did have our fair share of trying to, acclimatize to what the American public from the R&B world and from the pop world was about, but we realized that was not us at all. And all the reggae bands made that attempt, and the only two acts I could honestly say stuck to their guns, and I think it was a case of them not really knowing how to do it more than doing it and didn't work, was Burning Spear and Israel Vibration. If you're familiar with the reggae, the reggae acts that are out there. They're the only two acts I could remember during that period of time that said, hey, we're just going to do what we normally do. And, there you go. Burning Spear is still a larger-than-life act as we know it today.
Right.
He stuck to his guns, but everybody else did. So we had a period of time, saw that it wasn't working, and we said, nah, we're not doing this again. And, I came out with a song called Back to My Roots, and it was for that reason that we wrote that song, because we said we tried all that pop and jive to keep the band and the music alive. Here's my promise to everyone: we'll serve you all from this day on. It's time to go back to the way we were, reggae, ragamuffin, rubber dove, back to my roots. Right. So no more of that commercial stuff. It wasn't us. I mean, we started to dress up and trying to look fly, all this leather stuff, and you name it. We tried it just to keep the music alive, and realizing that wasn't where it was going to be at in the end.
Well, David, currently Still Pulse, y'all still a group, and I believe you're in the Caribbean. Are you still living in Birmingham or England? I mean, what's the whole status update of Still Pulse for people out there?
All right, I'm out here in the Caribbean right now, but in Birmingham is still where the tax man gets me. Yes.
Okay. Still in Birmingham, exactly.
Yeah.
And is Still Pulse still a group? I mean, are you doing solo projects, or are you working
Still
together?
Pulse is very much a group. I mean, the Still Pulse that everybody knew back in 1978 when we got together to enact is somewhat different. There's only two of the original members left, which is myself and Selwyn, but we got Amlak Tafari on bass, who's been with us for a good part of 20 years. And we also got C Sharp, Wayne Clark from out of Jamaica, who's been with us equally the same amount of time as well. So we've got band members that have been with us for quite some time. Our original drummer, Grizzly, passed away 5 years ago. Prior to that, he had retired from the band a good part of 15 years before, maybe more, because of ill health. So Still Pulse is pretty much still intact as an act.
Have you ever thought about doing any solo projects on your own, or you always was consistent with being a member and keeping Still Pulse working as a group?
I've done one or two solo projects, where I've sort of been out there, and sometimes someone wants a particular thing happening with their song, and they call me to be, to give them a few verses or what have you. And I've also went out there where I've worked with sound systems, which was a platform that we were never familiar with when we started out as a band. I mean, we um, we grew with the sound system era, but when it came to our music being played on the sound system, it wasn't really that kind of thing because, like I said, our music was not that type of music that was catering for the grassroots people within Jamaica itself. That was from, so because our music had a more of an international sound to it, just like Third World's. But after a while, the sound systems started to pick up on, the classics like Rally Round the Flag, Roller Skates, Back to My Roots, Chant a Psalm, those kind of songs, and I became more in demand to be out there performing these songs in my own rights, along with the sound systems, where I'd be either performing or singing with tracks, going around different parts of the world, getting a look in with the sound systems. So I sort of experienced that phase, which I'm happy that I did because I've come back wearing a brand new head and a completely different approach to how I look at music because the sound systems just have a different way of expressing themselves, and I thought it was necessary for Still Pulse to continue its longevity, looking at music from a different standpoint and how other people view us as musicians as well. That became equally as important.
Right, right. Well, David,
Yeah.
as we're wrapping up on this show, I would definitely tell people if you haven't really paid attention or know a lot about Steel Pulse, definitely go online because they have some great music that's put out. It was just a little bit unfortunate during the era, let's say, of cable and BT that your songs and videos weren't really getting the type of airplay that it deserved. Because I think people would have really appreciated and really been fond of listening to Steel Pulse. But through the luck of the draw, some things just don't always work out.
Yeah.
But mhm.
That's a valid point you've put out there, Jonathan, because at the time when we evolved and became recognized in the United States, although we were attached to major labels at the time, the major labels didn't really see a lot of things in regards to the reggae music and also the potential that the band had. And one of the things were when it came to videos, it was like a definite no video. And another thing as well that became a problem with us was they never believed in having a dub version of a song. So it took them many, many years to realize like a instrumental version of a song that's out there is equally as strong within the reggae domain as it is for the regular song in itself. So we had problems along those lines. Another problem we had as well as the video and the dub aspect of things, was actually trying to get our lyrics printed on the album sleeves. The labels weren't seeing that either. They didn't realize that we were a band that was international to a point where people that lived as far as Japan and lived as far as certain parts of the world in South America, where they spoke Spanish or Portuguese or spoke some other kind of language, Vietnamese or whatever you want, were learning English by reading the lyrics of Steel Pulse's songs on the album sleeves. And we were trying to get that kind of ideology impacted and instilled into the consciousness of the record labels who weren't at that time seeing it. So, there was one point where we ended up actually paying extra money ourselves to make sure there was a particular set of lyrics on the album sleeve because the record companies were not budgeting for that because they didn't believe that the lyrics needed to be on the album sleeves. And we're saying, hang on, what we have to say is very much potent for a lot of people out there. And it helped other people to speak English. And everywhere I go across the world, I go into French territories and they'll point out to me, well, I don't speak a word of English, but I understand all your songs because I learned to speak English by reading your lyrics and listening and understanding what you've got to say. So it was a hard road, and it's eased up a lot. Those who are the new players now, like your Proteges and your Chronixes and whoever is out there as an act, have a much easier ride than what we had to go through trying to establish the music.
And that's real important. And I'm glad you just said what you said about, the artist that's coming along now had an easier route to get into the industry because a group like Still Pulse and other groups during that era definitely broke down some barriers, and you have to always give credit where credit is due, just for that purpose alone. To go along with the influence that you just mentioned, people from throughout other countries learning how to speak English through listening to Still Pulse. I mean, I think many people may not even be aware of that, so I was definitely glad that you was able to state that. As we're ending this segment of this show, and I definitely appreciate you giving up your time to be a special guest on All About You, is there any last things that you would like for people to know, either about David Hinds or Still Pulse, before we end this segment?
To the people out there, friends, fans, and family, Still Pulse has always felt, and David Hinds always feel indebted to the people that have supported us over the years. And not once, not ever have we deviated or have not recognized and not been appreciative, or as Rastaman would say, appreciate love of the fact that there's an entity that's out there, you the public, you the people, you the fans, that have given us that break and have continued to recognize our efforts. And it keeps us going, that that you're out there and make us feel as if what we have to say has been worth our while and worth our efforts, and has not gone on stony ground, or has not gone in vain, basically. So that's what I'd like the fans to know, and what the people to know, how David Hinds feels about them and have always felt about them. And we don't lose sight of that reality. We feel continually humbled to know that it's because of you that we are still in existence.
Right. Those words are going to have to be your last words. Those words are well taken.
Last words for now.
Last words for now. That's what I meant for this particular segment. We definitely want to bring you back and bring other members and other people that you are affiliated with. There's a tremendous international sound that Still Pulse stands out with. And David Hinds, I definitely enjoy interviewing you this particular morning on All About You. And I wish you a very blessed life, getting towards the holidays, getting towards the new year. And I will definitely keep you in mind for future interview segments. Mm-hmm.
Thank you there, Jonathan. I wish I could see you right now. I'm just staring straight into
right,
camera,
right.
not knowing who.
Well,
you know what I mean? But
well,
it's
you
all
will,
good. I'm feeling their energy.
Exactly, and you will see me when you look at the rebroadcast of this segment, so you'll know who I am at some point. Okay. All right, David. Well, pleasure. Again, this is Jonathan Small. I had enjoyed hosting this edition of All About You. All About You, again, as I mentioned, is one or two different types of programs that I broadcast here live every single week at accesstv.org studios. And I look forward to having you as a guest, or bringing a guest in next week, and if it's God's willings, and definitely looking forward for the new month as well. Until I see you again, for people out there, you have a very blessed day. Thank you. Okay. Right, exactly. All right, we'll speak again. Okay.